I used to think the worst way to wake up was to my father knocking on my door, demanding I show some shred of responsibility, start an internship, pick a real major, become a functioning adult instead of a meandering failure with a trust fund. But that was before I woke up in a neon tent at the Festival of Shadows to the sound of 1,000 people screaming. 3 months ago, I overheard my father talking to his friend James. Lucas is approaching his Saturn return. That's when the universe forces you to grow up or break down. You can't run forever. 2 weeks later, I heard about the Festival of Shadows from a breathwork instructor in Sedona. Not just another festival, she'd whispered, eyes dilated with excitement. A complete reset of consciousness. People come out transformed. Transformation. The word ignited something in me. A desperate hope that maybe this would be the experience that finally made sense of my fragmented existence. So there I was at the Festival of Shadows, a 3-day carnival of lights, experimental cocktails, and questionable spiritual journeys buried deep in a remote forest. That was the plan anyway. A cosmic vacation from the standoff with my parents, from the ticking clock of my youth, from the creeping sense that my life had become a hamster wheel of half-baked escapism. But fate, or karma, or some chemically engineered monstrosity had other ideas. Because on the second night, the forest decided it was done hosting trust fund babies in LED spandex, and instead, the screaming started. I'd arrived with 3 semi-friends, Kara, a pink-haired philosophy major who quoted Nietzsche way too much, Kyle, a British trust fund kid with a talent for finding drugs in any country, and Yasmin, a former Wall Street analyst who'd abandoned 6 figures to find her soul at wellness retreats. The first night delivered the standard festival experience: ambient electronica, swirling lights, strangers in kaleidoscopic costumes hugging you while proclaiming, "We're all just starlight in human form." I recall watching a man dressed as a giant neon butterfly weaving between the trees, insisting the forest spirits were sending binary code directly to his pineal gland. That kind of place. I crashed before sunrise with the stupid optimism that I'd found my perfect bubble. No stress, no paternal disappointment, no existential dread. Just pure, unfiltered freedom. Which is why, when piercing screams shattered the pre-dawn quiet like glass breaking in my skull, I jolted awake thinking I'd accidentally ingested something with more kick than advertised. The first thing I saw when I unzipped my tent was Kyle, wide-eyed, panting, and covered in mud like he'd been baptized in filth. There's something, he stammered, chest heaving. They're biting. I saw blood. It's a literal hell out there, Lucas. You gotta get up. I blinked sleep crust from my eyes. Biting? People bite at festivals all the time, especially if... Not that kind of bite, he hissed. They're insane. Foam at the mouth insane. Behind him, silhouettes lurched between tents, moving with unsettling smoothness. One figure crouched over a prone form, and my stomach collapsed into itself when I realized they were feeding. An inadequate word for the frenzy of teeth and torn flesh, but my brain couldn't process a better one. Okay, I managed, crawling out. Where are Kara and Yasmin? In this moment of crisis, my mind flashed to all the escape plans I'd crafted throughout my life, from Princeton's suffocating hallways, from my father's disapproving gaze, from every commitment that threatened to anchor me. But this was different. I couldn't simply book a flight to Thailand or disappear into a Berlin nightclub. For once, running wasn't an option. Kyle gestured wildly toward the festival center, hands trembling like dead leaves in a storm. Kara went to find Yasmin. They were at some 4 a.m. sound healing session. She texted to meet at the food stalls, but I lost my phone in the mud. Then these freaks showed up, biting, tearing. Then, an announcement crackled over the loudspeakers. Attention, all attendees. The festival is under lockdown. Remain where you are. This is an emergency. A contagious infection has been reported. Please do not leave the premises. The message looped endlessly. Of course, my instincts screamed the opposite. Don't remain. Run. But logic had abandoned this place entirely. People sprinted in every direction, their faces warped by terror into masks I didn't recognize as human. "We need to find Kara and Yasmin," I said, forcing authority into my voice. "Then figure out if there's a way out." Kyle nodded, swallowing visibly. "Lead the way, man." I almost laughed at the cosmic joke. Me, the perpetual follower with zero leadership skills, suddenly expected to make life or death decisions. If only my father could see me now, though he'd probably be more concerned about the zombies than proud of my sudden responsibility. We skirted the vendor row, a place that yesterday sold overpriced smoothies with names like Transcendental Blueberry and Ego Death Elderberry. Now it resembled a hastily abandoned film set for a horror movie. The psychedelic smoothies sign lay half crushed, its blender dripping pink liquid that looked uncomfortably like diluted blood. Actual bloody footprints led from the booth toward the parking area. In the distance, strobe lights still pulsed mechanically, clashing with the dawn light to create a pulsing twilight that made everything look apocalyptic. My mind kept replaying Kyle's words. People are biting. People are going insane. I'd seen bad trips before. Someone convinced they're melting, another thinking they're being pursued by sentient geometry. But this was something else entirely, something broken at a fundamental level. A volunteer appeared around the corner, blood seeping through a makeshift bandage on his arm. His pupils were blown so wide his eyes looked black, lips trembling as he spoke. "Have you seen the medics?" Kyle shook his head. "No, sorry. Are you okay?" The man sagged against a booth, face drained to the color of old paper. "Something's..." He paused, looking at me like I might possess answers. "They say it's the forest cocktail, the mushrooms, some batch gone wrong." I remembered overhearing gossip about the festival's signature hallucinogen. Local mushrooms plus lab-synthesized compounds equals the ultimate trip. Apparently, it had evolved into the ultimate nightmare. The volunteer's eyes suddenly unfocused, then slowly rolled back as his breathing accelerated. "If you see them, send help." He staggered away, leaving bloody footprints across the grass. I exchanged a look with Kyle. Neither of us spoke the horrifying possibility hanging between us, that the volunteer was turning, that soon he'd join the ranks of the infected hunters. Kara had texted Kyle earlier that she and Yasmin were at a secret ceremony in the Northern Grove. Because of course they were. Even in a full-blown crisis, Kara would follow a goddamn butterfly off a cliff if she thought it was leading her to cosmic truth. We sprinted through a labyrinth of pines, following tattered signs scrawled with paint. My lungs burned with each breath, fear propelling me forward like a demented engine. Then we heard it, the chanting. In a hidden grove lit by flickering lanterns, about 20 people stood in a semicircle around a man wearing an antlered deer skull mask. I recognized him vaguely as Aiko the Guru, the main hype man behind this midnight spiritual rave. Except it was closer to dawn, and the chanting sounded strange. It was off-key and shaky, like a record played at the wrong speed. The participants swayed unsteadily, some shaking, others staring vacantly, while a half-empty bottle labeled Forest Cocktail gleamed on a makeshift altar. I spotted Kara's distinctive pink and green hair in the group. Next to her stood Yasmin, arms crossed, looking less spiritual and more like someone who'd just realized they'd made a terrible mistake. Kyle and I approached cautiously. As we did, Aiko raised his arms dramatically. "Embrace the forest spirit. Let the synergy of nature and science unite in your soul." He motioned to two participants, who each took a swig from a new bottle of the iridescent liquid. The crowd gasped, half in awe, half in dread. "Stop!" Kyle shouted, pushing forward. "Don't drink that, it's infected." Aiko turned his skull-masked head slowly, the movement unnaturally fluid. Doubt is an enemy of transcendence. My fear hardened into anger. "Look, you delusional moron. People are literally attacking each other out there. Your special brew is..." Too late. The two who drank began convulsing, their bodies contorting. One stumbled back into the altar, toppling candles and the half-empty bottle. The other collapsed to his knees, retching a neon-colored substance that steamed when it hit the pine needles. "Bloody hell," Kyle muttered. This is about to get real. Kara rushed to our side, Yasmin close behind. We tried to talk them out of it, Kara whispered, eyes wild. But they kept saying, if we don't believe, we're interfering with the spiritual plane. A harsh gurgle cut through the air as the kneeling participant arched his back, foam dripping from his mouth like rabid meringue. He shrieked, a sound so animal it made my bones vibrate with primal terror. Then he lunged at the nearest bystander, taking them down in a tangle of limbs. Chaos erupted, and more people began convulsing. Apparently they'd been drinking the cursed smoothie earlier. Some collapsed, trembling. Others sprang up with mindless fury, swinging at anything that moved. I watched in horror as a girl tore off her flower crown and began strangling her friend with the vines, her face twisted in an unsettling pleasure. Aiko scrambled backward, deer skull askew. He clutched a leather satchel to his chest. We just needed the correct dosage. Kara pointed at him, desperation in her voice. Does that bag have any antidote? Do something. Aiko's eyes darted to his satchel. Antidote. Yes, the sacred herbs. He fumbled with the bag, pulling out glass vials and pouches of powder with shaking hands. We stared, hope battling skepticism, but the moment shattered as two newly infected festival goers charged toward us, mouths open wide. Kyle grabbed a broken tree branch, holding it like a primitive spear. Yasmin fumbled for her pepper spray, while I froze, hyper-aware of how utterly unprepared I was to fight anything more threatening than student loan paperwork. One of the infected lunged at me, but as I scrambled behind the altar, knocking over candles and herbs, the zombie moved towards another target. My hands shook as I crouched there, memories of childhood piano recitals flooding back. The same useless hands, the same paralyzing fear. Back then, my father would watch from the audience, his expression a perfect mask of patience that couldn't quite hide his disappointment when I missed notes. Lucas doesn't handle pressure well, he'd explain to colleagues afterward. Now, with actual lives at stake, his assessment felt prophetic. I was cracking under pressure again, but this time failure meant death, not just parental disapproval. As Kara suddenly screamed my name, I looked up to see her pinned beneath an infected woman dripping blood-tinged saliva onto her face. My heart slammed against my ribs. My friend was seconds from becoming a human appetizer. So I grabbed a chunk of the wooden altar and smashed it against the infected's shoulder, causing her to whirl on me instead, giving Kara time to scramble away. Yasmin blasted her pepper spray, creating a noxious cloud that bought us precious seconds to regroup with Kyle, who was fending off another attacker with his branch. Meanwhile, Aiko fumbled with bright red vials. But before he could do anything, someone collided with him, snatching the entire satchel. My jaw dropped. It was Layla, a festival acquaintance from Berlin who always bragged about her side hustles. She clutched the satchel like it contained diamonds. "Layla," Kara exclaimed. "What are you doing?" Layla's eyes darted between us and her prize. "These herbs, worth a fortune on the black market." "Forget the market. We need a cure if there is one," Kara pleaded. Layla shrugged with chilling detachment. "There's no cure. That's just a rumor. But these compounds? People will pay big money if we make it out." Before we could respond, the infected surged forward. One latched onto Layla's arm, teeth snapping. She kicked free and vanished into the chaos, taking our only hope of an antidote with her. We had no choice but to flee, the sounds of feeding following us through the trees like a hunger that could never be satisfied. The last time I saw Aiko, the spiritual guru was pinned beneath one of his disciples, the deer skull mask skittering away across the ground like an escaping pet. "The lounge," Kyle panted as we ran. "Artist's lounge, solid walls." The question of shelter suddenly overshadowed everything. We needed walls, real walls, not the flimsy fabric of tents that might as well be tissue paper against the infected. The artist's lounge stood near the festival's western edge, a large chalet-like structure normally reserved for performers and VIPs. We approached cautiously, picking our way past giant mannequins draped in tattered lights, their forms looking increasingly like harbingers of what we were becoming, empty vessels waiting to be filled with madness. The lounge door was barricaded from inside, so Kara knocked gently. "Hello? Is anyone there?" A peephole slid open, revealing a suspicious eye. After a tense negotiation involving our meager supplies as entry fee, they let us in, checking first for bites or scratches. The lounge was surprisingly spacious, with a sleek bar area and tinted windows partially covered with makeshift barricades. About a dozen survivors huddled inside, many armed with improvised weapons, baseball bats, golf clubs, a fire extinguisher. Their leader appeared to be Rex Anders, a once famous DJ whose face adorned promotional posters throughout the festival. His flashy grin had dissolved into a scowl that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else in the universe. "We'll let you stay," Rex announced, "but only if you contribute." Yasmin frowned. "We just gave you our supplies." The woman who'd opened the door, Pax, with her half-shaved head and calculating eyes, snorted. "And that was your entry fee. If you want to remain, you work. Barricade windows, handle guard shifts. We can't afford freeloaders." I exchanged a glance with Kyle. The door behind us rattled under a fresh assault from outside. We mumbled our agreement. At least we had walls now. As we settled into an empty corner, I spotted Carlos, a peripheral friend who'd tagged along to the festival. He slid over, eyes darting nervously. "Lucas, man, I thought you might be dead." I shrugged. "Almost was." Repeatedly. He rubbed his nose, glancing around like he expected to be overheard. "This place is intense, huh? They got a system." I noticed the uneasy flicker in his eyes, but attributed it to the same fear eating at all of us. We helped with barricading windows and stacking furniture against doors, trying to ignore the stench of sweat and terror that permeated the lounge. Someone had turned on a stereo playing low, muffled beats, a futile attempt at normalcy that only heightened the surrealism. While pushing a couch against a side exit, Rex appeared behind me. "Hey, new guy," he said, leaning uncomfortably close. "I hear from Carlos you're loaded." I blinked, confusion momentarily overriding fear. "Loaded? My trust fund is basically in my parents' control." He smirked. "Doesn't matter. Word is you have resources we could use. Money, connections. Maybe you can arrange a private evacuation." "We're quarantined," I argued. "No one can..." Rex's eyes narrowed to slits. "Don't play me. If you're holding out, that's dangerous for everyone." Realization dawned like ice water down my spine. Carlos had sold information about my perceived wealth to curry favor. The betrayal stung with familiar sharpness. I'd spent years collecting people as I traveled. Beautiful, convenient friendships built on shared experiences but little genuine trust. I'd designed my relationships to be disposable, chosen people who wouldn't demand vulnerability or accountability. And here was the result. My mother's words from one of her rare lucid moments echoed in my mind. "Lucas, darling, shallow roots make trees that topple in the first strong wind." I dismissed her wisdom back then. But before I could confront either Carlos or Rex, shrieks erupted outside. The infected had found us. As I peered through a gap in the barricades, I saw a cluster of infected hammering at the walls with frantic limbs, their eyes vacant, mouths frozen in perpetual snarls. One pressed its face against the window, leaving a smear of something viscous on the glass. "They'll break in if they're determined," Pax muttered. Rex ordered everyone to hold position, but panic was already spreading through the lounge like spilled poison. The infected groaned and scraped, rattling the boards with each impact. An alarmed shout came from the back. "They're coming through the service door." We rushed to reinforce it, pushing a heavy cabinet against the buckling metal. But just as we thought we had it secured, the door caved inward with a screech of torn hinges. An infected woman lunged inside, her festival attire stained with gore. As Kyle slammed the cabinet forward, trying to crush her against the wall, 2 more infected squeezed through the gap. We pressed our weight against the cabinet, muscles burning with effort. Rex's crew arrived with table legs and a crowbar. They pinned the first infected under the cabinet, and I looked away as the sickening sounds of skull being crushed filled the corridor. We reinforced the door with speakers and metal racks, but the damage was done. The lounge was compromised. In the aftermath, Rex's group retreated to an inner hallway, sealing it off from the main area and us. I heard the lock click with sickening finality. "They locked us out," Carlos gasped. A voice from behind the door called out, "Sorry, can't risk it." Rex was cutting the lounge into sections, containing the threat by sacrificing those he deemed less valuable. The windows in our section burst inward, and infected poured through like a tide of writhing limbs. Yasmin screamed from across the room as one grabbed her hair. I wielded a broken chair, fending off an infected man whose face was partially torn away. He spat blood and saliva that spattered my arms. Every droplet burned like acid on my skin, each potentially carrying infection. As Carlos cowered behind me, whimpering for help, the irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd betrayed me now expected salvation. I looked at Carlos, rage and fear battling within me. "Help us fight or help yourself. Your choice." Kara was cornered by two infected, desperately slashing with a piece of broken glass. And in the chaos, we noticed that a storage door on the side hung partially open. It was our only escape route. We needed to reach it, but the infected stood between us and freedom. "The door," Kara yelled. "Now or never." We fought our way to the exit, Kyle and Yasmin clearing a path while I guarded the rear. Carlos tried to follow, but an infected grabbed his leg. He howled, kicking frantically. Time slowed to a crawl. Did I let the backstabber die? Could I live with myself if I did? My limbs moved before my mind decided, driving my chair into the infected side, giving Carlos a chance to escape. We squeezed through the broken door into a dusty hallway lined with equipment cases. Behind us, fists pounded against the barricade we hastily assembled. The sounds from the main lounge suggested it was completely overrun. Those inside, Rex included, were meeting a fate I couldn't bear to imagine. "I can't believe you saved me," Carlos whispered, voice cracking. I didn't answer. I was too exhausted, too hollow to form words. We emerged from the lounge's rear exit into the forest. The mid-morning air should have been fresh, but it carried the stench of decay and chemical sweetness, like rotting fruit soaked in cough syrup. The sky stretched overhead in a mockingly perfect blue, oblivious to the horror below. After escaping several wandering infected, we reached the festival's central zone. The iconic main stage rose before us, its scaffold structure resembling the rib cage of some massive extinct beast. The big LED screen flickered with random patterns, occasionally displaying the message, "Stay calm, lockdown in effect," in blood-red letters. A handful of survivors had established a perimeter around the stage using metal fence panels. Floodlights bathed the area in harsh brightness, and a distorted techno track played on endless loop like a damn soundtrack to our apocalypse. A tired guard waved us through a gap. Inside, about 24 people nursed injuries or stared vacantly into space. Some clutched backpacks of supplies like life rafts in a storm. Others rocked back and forth, lips moving in silent prayers. Harris, a security member trying to maintain order, explained they were using the main stage for its vantage point and open space. The infected prefer corners and darkness. We can see them coming here. Relief flooded through me. Finally, a place with some semblance of organization. We claimed a spot near some equipment crates, and I collapsed, letting exhaustion wash over me in waves. My muscles ached with a bone-deep fatigue, and my head throbbed from dehydration and stress. I closed my eyes, just for a moment. But when I opened them again, the world seemed off. Colors too vivid, edges too sharp. My skin tingled with hypersensitivity. "Lucas?" Kara's voice sounded distant. "Are you okay?" I nodded, though I felt anything but okay. Had I been exposed to the infection somehow? Splashed with infected blood? Inhaled airborne spores? The paranoia felt like a living thing crawling through my brain. Before I could voice my concerns, a new group entered the perimeter. My stomach lurched when I recognized their leader, Dylan, a former friend I'd parted ways with years ago. We traveled together briefly, but his cutthroat approach to life, forging fake passes, skipping hostel bills, had eventually driven us apart. His eyes locked on me immediately. Well, if it isn't Lucas Cole. I stood unsteadily, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. Dylan, didn't expect to see you here. He stepped closer, and I noticed a pistol tucked into his belt. I go where the party is, even if the party's gone to hell. He gestured to his crew, hard-faced individuals armed with crowbars and pipes. We've been scavenging, weapons, meds, anything useful. Something was wrong with my perception. Dylan's face seemed to pulse, his features occasionally blurring into something inhuman. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear my vision. We're planning to break out, he continued. Southwestern Gate's our best bet, but we need supplies, bandages, antibiotics. There's a stash at the first aid tents, but wounded folks are hoarding it. He let the statement hang in the air, his meaning clear. Then he said, "Join us. We'll take what we need. No more playing nice." A wave of disgust rolled through me. You want to steal from injured survivors? Dylan shrugged, his face momentarily dissolving into crawling patterns before reforming. They might not live long enough to use it. This is about survival. My head throbbed harder as the world around me rippled like heat waves over asphalt. Dylan's voice became a buzzing drone, and my consciousness fractured into 1,000 pieces. Was I infected? Hallucinating? The forest cocktail must have spread through the air, through water, through touch. Still the same naive dreamer, Dylan sneered, his face shifting between human and monstrous. Reality's here now, its fangs and claws, and you either bite first or get bitten. If you join us, I'll guarantee your friend's safety. Otherwise, you're on your own, he continued. I mumbled something about needing time to think. He wandered off, directing his crew to search the stage's side rooms. As soon as he left, Kara, Kyle, and Yasmin circled around me, their faces concerned. Or were they hungry? Lucas, Yasmin said, her voice echoing strangely. You're not actually considering his offer? I shook my head, then immediately regretted it as the world spun. No, I don't feel right. Kara reached toward me, her fingers elongating in my vision. I flinched away. Her expression flickered between hurt and something more sinister. Or was that my imagination? Something's wrong with me, I whispered. I think I'm infected. Kyle frowned, leaning closer. His pupils seemed too large, too black. You don't have any bites. Maybe you're just exhausted. But the hallucinations intensified. The techno music warped into screams, then back again. And worst of all, my friends' faces continued to shift, sometimes appearing normal, sometimes transforming into hungry, distorted versions with too wide mouths and gleaming eyes. A sudden scream cut through my delirium. It came from behind the stage. Dylan's group had been searching there. We rushed over. The scene before us swam in and out of focus. One of Dylan's men writhing on the ground, an infected latched to his shoulder. Blood painted the grass in abstract patterns that seemed to move of their own accord. Dylan's reaction was immediate and brutal. He drew his pistol and shot his own man in the head, execution style. The gunshot reverberated through my skull like a physical blow. For a moment, everything froze. Then the infected hissed and lunged again. Another of Dylan's crew smashed it with a pipe, caving in its skull. Dylan turned to me. See what I mean? Mercy is a liability. He approached, gun still in hand. Well, time's up. Are you with me or not? The world pulsed around me, reality disintegrating at the edges. I can't, I managed to say. I can't help you rob the wounded. His expression darkened. Then you're a threat. Behind him, I saw movement. More infected, drawn by the gunshot. But as they approached, my distorted perception made it impossible to distinguish between infected and human. Everyone's faces kept shifting, mouths stretching into hungry maws, eyes darkening. Dylan turned to deal with the new threat, barking orders to his crew. Chaos erupted again, the stage area becoming a swirl of bodies and noise. I stumbled backward, disoriented and terrified, unsure who was friend and who was foe. Someone grabbed my arm. I whirled, seeing Kara, but was it really her? Her face kept changing, features melting and reforming. One moment she looked normal, the next her eyes were black pits, her mouth stretching wide. I could no longer trust my own senses. "Lucas, we need to move," she shouted. But as fear and confusion overwhelmed me, I lashed out, shoving her away. She stumbled back, eyes wide with shock. Human shock, I thought. But then her face rippled again, and I saw hunger there. Carlos appeared beside me, face twisted into something monstrous. He reached for me with elongated fingers. "Lucas, help me," he moaned, but his voice sounded wrong, guttural and hungry. I remembered his betrayal, how he'd sold me out to Rex. Now he was turning, becoming one of them. In my fractured perception, I saw infection spreading across his skin in dark, crawling patterns. "Stay back," I yelled, grabbing a broken metal pipe someone had dropped. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice fluctuating between human and monster. "It's me." But I couldn't trust it, couldn't trust anything. He lunged forward, or did he simply step closer? I couldn't tell anymore. My arms moved of their own accord, swinging the pipe in a wide arc. It connected with a sickening thud. Carlos crumpled, blood spraying from his temple. He lay motionless, eyes staring upward in shocked betrayal. I realized he was no longer breathing. He was dead. The world snapped back into focus for one horrifying moment of clarity. Carlos wasn't infected. He wasn't attacking me. He had simply reached out for help, and I had killed him. Kara screamed, the sound piercing through my delirium. "What have you done?" I stared at my hands, at the bloody pipe, at Carlos's still form. Horror washed over me. I thought he was turning," I stammered. "I can't tell what's real anymore." Yasmin backed away from me, eyes wide with fear of me, not the infected. Kyle stood frozen, shock written across his face. In that moment, I was more terrified of myself than of any infected. What else might I do in this state? Who else might I hurt? Dylan's laughter cut through the horror, sharp and cruel. "Now you get it," he said, appearing beside me. "No one's innocent here. We're all monsters now." But even as he spoke, more infected burst onto the stage, drawn by the commotion. Real infected this time. I could tell by how others reacted to them. The momentary clarity faded, and the world began to distort again. But I fought to maintain control, to distinguish reality from hallucination. "The gate!" Harris shouted above the chaos. "It's our only chance." So we fled the stage area, the guilt of Carlos's death weighing on me like lead. I couldn't look at Kara or the others. I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The southwestern gate appeared in the distance, steel bars with a thick padlock. Beyond it, a dirt road promised escape. A battered shuttle bus idled nearby, engine running, a solitary figure behind the wheel waving frantically for us to hurry. The infected swarmed the clearing between us and freedom. When they spotted our group emerging from the trees, they charged like a pack of wild coyotes. "Move," Harris commanded. We sprinted forward, wielding our makeshift weapons. As the infected closed in, one latched onto a woman in our group, tearing into her shoulder. Her scream cleaved through me like physical pain. Kara and I pulled the infected off, but the damage was done. The woman collapsed, blood streaming from the wound. We exchanged a horror-struck look. She was doomed. Another infected tackled Kyle from behind. The pistol he'd been carrying skittered across the ground. Yasmin leapt to his defense, slashing with her broken bottle, her face a mask of desperate fury. I grabbed a section of metal fencing, thrusting it forward like a shield. The infected battered against it, fingers curling through the links to reach us. Harris and others lifted the edges, using it as a mobile barricade to push them back. Behind us, the bus driver laid on the horn. "Hurry, hurry, hurry." We broke free, racing toward the gate still locked with a heavy chain. Kyle wedged his crowbar into the links. The chain snapped with a metallic pop that sent a surge of hope through my veins. We pushed the gate open, and some ran straight for the bus, while others, too slow or too wounded, were overtaken and eaten alive. As I reached the steps, I turned back. The faces of those we were abandoning burned into my memory, expressions of betrayal and despair that would haunt me forever. I wanted to help more of them, but the driver slammed the door shut as the bus lurched forward. "They're gone," he shouted over the engine. "Nothing we can do." The shuttle bounced along the forest road, engine protesting every incline. Inside, silence reigned except for ragged breathing and occasional sobs. I collapsed into a seat near the back, trembling hands still coated with Carlos's dried blood, flaking now, turning rust brown in the crevices of my knuckles. Every time I blinked, I saw him crumpling beneath my swing, accusation freezing in his eyes before the light drained from them. Kara sat across the aisle, her face a fractured mirror reflecting back a version of me I never wanted to see. The bus hummed beneath us, its metal shell vibrating with secrets. But something wasn't right. My perception wavered, reality rippling like heat mirages, faces melting at the edges of my vision. The bus driver's silhouette remained rigid against the windshield, head tilted at an angle that spoke of vertebrae no longer quite aligned. We had been driving for how long? Time stretched and compressed like taffy pulled between cruel fingers. "We're going the wrong way," Kyle muttered, voice scratched raw from screaming. He pointed at the sun, hanging wrong in the sky. "That's east. Civilization is south." "Excuse me," I managed, one hand clutching the overhead rail. "You've missed the turn." The driver's head pivoted, one fluid movement. His eyes reflected nothing, twin voids beneath the shadow of his cap. A dark line trailed from his nostril, obsidian against bloodless skin. "The path is chosen," he intoned, voice hollow as an empty grave. "The shadows welcomed us. Now we join the congregation." I staggered back to my seat, legs folding beneath me. "Something's wrong with him," I whispered, the words scraping my throat. "He's infected, but different." Yasmin leaned forward, pupils dilated to drowning pools. "He's still cognitive. The others weren't." Her voice trembled. What if this is the next stage? What if the mindless aggression evolves into something directed?" The landscape outside had transformed. No longer festival grounds or healing forest, but something ancient and wrong. Trees hunched like arthritic giants, branches reaching toward the bus with finger-like protrusions. Between them, dark figures moved, too fluid, too synchronized. The realization crashed through me like physical pain. The driver wasn't taking us to safety. He was delivering us, to what or whom I couldn't comprehend. The bus curved around a bend, revealing a sprawling compound nestled in a valley. Buildings of weathered wood formed concentric circles around a central structure that resembled a temple. "We need to get off this bus," Kara hissed, panic threading her voice. "Now." My gaze fell to my hands again, Carlos's blood still embedded in my skin, the ultimate reminder of consequence. I'd killed him because I couldn't distinguish friend from foe, reality from delusion. My entire existence had been predicated on the privilege of escape, from my father's expectations, from Princeton's pressure, from any relationship that threatened to anchor me in place. Each life chapter abandoned like shedding skin, slipping away when the weight of commitment or disappointment grew too heavy. The eternal tourist in my own existence, collecting experiences while contributing nothing. The bus engine groaned as we descended toward the compound, wheels crunching on gravel. Panic clawed up my throat. My shoulders twitched with the instinct to run, to flee, to escape once again. But where? The forest? With its shadows that moved independent of light sources? With these things waiting among the trees? "Lucas?" Kara's voice cut through my spiral, raw with need. "What do we do?" I looked around at the survivors, not disposable connections I'd discard when convenient, but people now bound to me through shared trauma. People looking to me, not because I had answers, but because in this moment, running wasn't an option. Not alone, anyway. The Saturn return my father spoke of, that cosmic moment when the universe forces you to grow up or break down, it wasn't about conforming to his vision of success. It was about this, taking responsibility for something beyond my immediate comfort, building, not consuming. "We need to break out," I said, the decision crystallizing like a diamond. All of us, together. So as the bus slowed, approaching the compound entrance where dozens of figures waited with upturned faces, I moved to the emergency exit window. My fingers closed around the small red hammer meant for shattering glass. "When I break this, everyone goes," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "East, into the trees. Stay together in groups. Whatever these people are, they're changed by the same thing that affected the festival goers, but evolved somehow." The driver's laughter floated back to us, a sound like nails dragging across piano wire. "The shadows found us all," he crooned. "You're already home." My grip tightened on the hammer as the bus slowed to a crawl. The faces outside turned toward us with synchronized precision, dozens of pairs of eyes, all with the same vacant depth, the same patient hunger. One blow. The glass exploded outward, shards catching morning light like falling stars. "Now!" I shouted, helping Kara through the jagged opening. Kyle followed, then Yasmin, then the others, a desperate exodus from our rolling prison. I hesitated at the threshold, shards of glass like teeth framing the opening. The driver's face appeared in the rearview mirror, his eyes meeting mine. Something passed between us, recognition of a shared transformation. His physical, mine psychological, both irreversible. "You'll be back," he said softly. "The shadows always find their children." I leapt, glass slicing my palms as I tumbled to the gravel below. The impact rattled my bones, but I scrambled to my feet, running after the others toward the tree line. Behind us, the congregation moved with terrible unity, not rushing but advancing with the certainty of predators who know their prey has nowhere to go. As we plunged into the forest, no longer running from the infected but from something that had transcended infection, I realized with sickening clarity, I might never know what's real again. The forest cocktail, whatever it contained, had broken something fundamental in my perception. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't running alone, and I wasn't running to escape responsibility, but toward it, toward the terrifying prospect of being needed, of making decisions that affected more lives than just my own. The trees closed around us, branches scraping against skin like reluctant embraces. Ahead, Kara and Kyle helped each other over fallen logs. Yasmin paused to wait for me, her hand extended. I took it, our blood mingling, Carlos's, mine, hers, a covenant more binding than any I'd signed with my father or his banks, a promise without an escape clause. Behind us, the congregation's synchronized movements created a rhythm like chanting without words. They were gaining, their patience more terrifying than pursuit. Whatever waited beyond this forest, rescue or further horror, it wouldn't be something I could face alone or run from when it became difficult. My father had been right all along, though not in the way he intended. And as we ran deeper into the woods, away from one nightmare and possibly toward another, I understood that the true horror of the Festival of Shadows wasn't the infected, or the death, or even the fractured perception. It was the inescapable truth that had found me at last. There was nowhere left to run that would take me away from myself. The shadows lengthened around us. Night would come again, and we were very far from home. That's the end of this story. If you enjoyed the video, subscribing to my channel would help me out more than you can imagine. I appreciate you, and I'll see you soon.